They thought her silence meant defeat. The meeting ended with a forced resignation, a controlled humiliation dressed in professional language, the kind of betrayal that left no fingerprints yet cut deeper than any outburst. But what they miscalculated was simple. The woman they erased was the one who had built the system they now leaned on without question. This story does not scream. It observes. It does not rage. It calculates. And in the quiet, she prepares. To stop watching is to miss how silence dismantles arrogance, brick by brick, until nothing corrupt stands. I had given them years, quietly, without demand for spotlight, without noise, and when they called me into that room, it was with the same sterile efficiency they reserved for quarterly reviews. The firing was abrupt, choreographed into a script of detached professionalism. "This isn't personal," they said, as if those words could launder the betrayal into something neutral, digestible, harmless. That was the lie, and we all knew it. Their eyes slid past mine, uncomfortable with my silence. No protest, no collapse, no rage. I nodded once, signed what was placed in front of me, and walked out. They thought the absence of resistance was surrender, but it was not. My silence was calculation. To them, I was a relic to be dismissed. To me, their words confirmed only one thing. They had no idea what they had just severed themselves from. I left the office without ceremony, no box of belongings, no staged farewell. But beneath the still surface, the truth remained. They had removed me from the room, but not from the infrastructure. Every server, every access protocol, every flow of information that pulsed through the organization bore my imprint. Systems were not faceless. They were human work, and much of that work was mine. They thought my invisibility meant obsolescence, yet invisibility was the very feature that made me indispensable. They believed they could erase me, but they could not erase what I had built. The first complication arrived quickly. My access was stripped overnight, passwords revoked, digital trails sealed as if erasure could undo memory. Yet systems are not only passwords. Systems are patterns, and patterns leave residue. From the outside, I watched. The numbers whispered before the people did. Audit trails that once ran smooth now carried ripples. Discrepancies appeared, small, almost invisible, but they were there, like cracks spreading through polished glass. Authorized paperwork masked them, but paperwork can only cover what eyes refuse to see. I had seen too much for too long to miss the signatures of manipulation. And then came the consultant. He arrived with jargon in hand, an agent of strategic renewal. His task was clear: overwrite history with new narratives, make old knowledge irrelevant, bury what I embodied. He was not the danger himself. He was the signal that danger had already been formalized. The midpoint was clarity. What had begun as suspicion hardened into certainty. The fraud was systemic. Shell companies bled resources into invisible pockets. Payrolls swelled with names that were blood relatives, not employees. Compliance officers, who should have been shields, were instead accomplices, trading oversight for comfort. It was not a single theft. It was an architecture of rot. At that moment, my role shifted. I was no longer watching. Observation hardened into intervention. Emotionally, I recalibrated. Anger, grief, humiliation, they had their place, but not here. My strength was precision. Silence remained my armor, but now it was sharpened into strategy. They sensed it before I spoke. The legal department moved first, thinly veiled threats dressed as protective clauses, warning me of liability, of professional discretion. They thought intimidation could silence me further, but their attempts only confirmed what I already knew. They were afraid. The more they pushed, the clearer it became that my knowledge was not redundant but dangerous. Their fear validated my path. They had underestimated me, and underestimation is a lever waiting to be pulled. The execution required patience. Exposure could not be emotional. It had to be controlled. I gathered what I needed, the evidence archived long before they thought to sever me. Forensic data trails, backups with timestamps, packets of information prepared like seeds waiting for the right soil. When the moment came, it was not in anger but in precision. The boardroom was the stage, the disclosures timed to unfold not in chaos but in sequence, each revelation layered on the next. Shell firms revealed, complicit signatures highlighted, transactions mirrored against false compliance reports. There was no space for denial. The system itself testified. Fallout was immediate. Media channels received what they needed. Stakeholders reeled. The carefully controlled facade collapsed. And then came the inevitable request. They wanted me back. But I did not return as supplicant. I returned with terms. This was not about revenge. Revenge was noise, temporary, corrosive. This was reconstruction. If I stepped back inside, it would be to rebuild, to excise rot and restore integrity. The power was not theirs to grant, it had always been mine to reclaim. The final image is not of me triumphant, nor them defeated. It is of structure, bridges repaired, frameworks restored, systems once corrupted realigned to hold weight again. I am not the loudest voice in the room, but the foundation beneath it. They had tried to erase me, and instead, I rebuilt. The protagonist exists as the silent architect, the one whose fingerprints remain on every hidden seam of the institution. Her archetype is not that of spectacle or brilliance, but of memory, an institutional record encoded not on paper but in PR. Actus. Her core trait is precision, the quiet devotion to detail that others overlook, the unglamorous but essential discipline that holds systems together. She is thorough, not loud, and it is this thoroughness that makes her indispensable even when discarded. Psychologically, her trajectory arcs in 3 movements. At the start, she is loyal and quietly competent, uncelebrated yet foundational. She does not demand recognition because her validation lies in the smooth function of what she built. She is underappreciated precisely because she never falters. In the middle, after being erased, she becomes distanced, observing from the margins. From the exterior, she watches as cracks appear, as betrayal unfolds into negligence. Her observation is not passive, it is assessment. She charts networks of threat, traces shadows where fraud hides, calibrates her understanding until the moment comes to act. By the end, her posture has transformed. She is not the dismissed employee, but the strategist who reclaims integrity. Her silence evolves into assertion, not through shouting but through disclosure, a revelation of rot that exposes not only individuals, but the system itself. Her emotional palette is narrow by design. Anger is never voiced, grief is never performed. Instead, control becomes her weapon, repression her shield, silence her strength. What she withholds speaks louder than any expression could. The restraint is not emptiness, it is discipline, honed over years of knowing that noise draws attention, but silence accumulates power. The boss is the catalyst of betrayal, the MBA careerist who embodies the arrogance of systemic ignorance. He is not villainous in the cinematic sense, but in the procedural, bureaucratic one. His archetype is the corporate climber, moving not through depth but through optics, mistaking surface metrics for substance. His function in the story is simple. He becomes the face of the betrayal, the one who fires her without insight, who reads her silence as weakness. His confidence in his decision is built on misunderstanding. He believes dismissal is final because he believes presence is what grants power. He cannot see that the absence of noise is not absence of capacity. His role is to trigger the fracture, to initiate the chain that reveals how brittle his authority truly is. The operational villain, more hidden and dangerous, is the fraudster, often embodied as a CFO or equivalent, the one who manipulates legitimate mechanisms to conceal theft. His archetype is not flashy corruption but embedded decay. He does not steal in ways that draw attention. He steals through structures, through vendors, shell firms, carefully crafted compliance reports that carry the appearance of legitimacy. His function is to be the engine of rot, the living contradiction between oversight and exploitation. His tactics are subtle. He leverages personal ties, inserts relatives onto payrolls, launders theft through layers of paperwork. He believes longevity ensures immunity, that exposure becomes less likely with each year passed. This is his arrogance, and it is precisely this arrogance that makes him vulnerable to someone who knows the system better than he does. The consultant arrives as disposable authority, an imported voice meant to overwrite history with buzzwords and slide decks. His archetype is the threat amplifier, the one who signifies the purge of institutional memory. His function is not innovation but erasure, replacing experience with jargon, pretending that new language can substitute for old wisdom. His arrival matters because it confirms intent. They do not merely want her gone, they want her knowledge destroyed, her imprint scrubbed from relevance. He believes he carries authority, but his power is temporary, instrumental, a tool that collapses the moment rot is revealed. The emotional anchor is the one figure untouched by the machinery of betrayal, a spouse, partner, or close friend. Their archetype is non-mechanical presence, grounding the protagonist in value beyond systems. They do not advance the plot in the structural sense, but instead offer moments of moral contrast. Their role is to remind the protagonist and the audience that worth is not measured only in data and architecture. They embody the life outside the institution, the tenderness that persists even in the shadow of betrayal. In their presence, silence softens into something human, not strategic. They are not there to fix but to remind, not to fight but to anchor, ensuring that the protagonist's struggle is not consumed entirely by systems, but tethered to dignity. Together, these roles form an ecosystem of betrayal and reclamation. The protagonist's silence opposes the boss's arrogance. Her precision dismantles the fraudster's concealment. Her endurance outlasts the consultant's disposability, and her human connection tempers what could otherwise collapse into obsession. Each character is a function, but within function lies psychology, and within psychology lies the truth of why betrayal cuts so deep and why silence, when weaponized, becomes unbreakable. The first theme that emerges is loyalty against exploitation, the unspoken bargain that years of integrity and labor will be met with recognition or at least respect. Yet in her story, loyalty is not rewarded but erased. The betrayal is not loud, not a spectacle of cruelty, but bureaucratic in its permanence. The institution discards her not because she failed, but because she succeeded too quietly, because her contributions cannot be translated into the language of optics. This is the nature of systemic betrayal. It does not arrive as confrontation but as formality, signed and sealed with polite dismissal. What cuts deepest is not rage or insult, but the silence with which a life's work can be erased from official record while still pulsing. Through every wire of the system. The theme insists that exploitation often masquerades as professionalism, and the wound it leaves is invisible, yet enduring. Layered into this betrayal is the illusion of power, a theme that strips away the facade of titles and positions. The bosses and executives wield authority on paper, but paper is not reality. The true power resides with those who understand the systems intimately, those who built the processes that others now manipulate without comprehension. Her dismissal was meant to demonstrate hierarchy, but hierarchy collapses when it is divorced from knowledge. The story underscores how power without depth is fragile, a performance that cannot withstand scrutiny. The executives believed authority insulated them, yet their ignorance left them exposed to the one person who understood that the architecture itself was more enduring than the titles that sought to claim ownership of it. Closely tied to this illusion is the theme of invisibility as asset. She had spent years being overlooked, her work hidden by its own effectiveness. But invisibility, which was once her burden, becomes her shield and eventually her weapon. They did not see her because they chose not to. They assumed invisibility meant irrelevance. Yet that same invisibility allowed her to move unnoticed, to observe, to collect, to prepare. What others misinterpreted as weakness revealed itself as an advantage. By the time they realized the quiet figure they had dismissed was the one who could dismantle them, it was already too late. Another theme running beneath the surface is institutional rot, the recognition that the system did not fail by accident, but by design, because comfort thrives in blindness. The fraud persisted not because oversight was impossible, but because oversight was unwelcome. Those in power had no appetite for truth that would disturb their balance, so they chose to look away. Corruption does not need a vacuum, it needs complacency, and that complacency was the soil in which the fraud flourished. Our discovery is less about the shock of hidden crime than about the inevitability of decay when silence is rewarded and vigilance is punished. Finally, there is the theme of discipline over emotion. She does not explode because explosion is waste. Her power lies not in catharsis but in control, not in venting but in withholding. Betrayal could have reduced her to anger, humiliation, or despair, but she understood that such emotions, if externalized, would only confirm the narrative of weakness. Instead, she endures, she prepares, and she moves with surgical restraint. Her silence is not passivity, but design, each withheld word a calculated step toward exposure. The discipline to wait, to collect, to strike at the exact moment when the system is most vulnerable, becomes the final testament to her strength. The style of the narrative is governed by minimalism, where every line matters and nothing is wasted. There are no redundancies, no indulgent detours, no exposition that exists for its own sake. Each sentence is stripped to its necessary weight, delivering impact without adornment. The reader is not carried by excess, but by the discipline of economy, where silence between words carries as much force as the words themselves. This is not a story that sprawls outward, but one that contracts inward, drawing focus until each detail becomes sharp, deliberate, and irrefutable. Minimalism ensures that when a revelation comes, it lands not as noise but as a precise fracture cutting through quiet. The perspective is deeply interior, the plot unfolding not through external spectacle but through the protagonist's internal recalibration. The world is filtered through her silence, her restraint, her watchfulness. Events are not narrated as they happen in public, but as they are processed in private, in the quiet calculations of a mind attuned to patterns. This interior lens ensures that tension does not come from what others say or do, but from how she receives it, interprets it, and repositions herself in response. By granting the audience access to thought over action, the narrative transforms from drama into psychological architecture, where suspense is born from what is not yet spoken aloud. The tone remains cold, controlled, forensic, with each emotional beat earned not through expression but through withholding. Her anger is never declared, her grief never dramatized. Instead, the chill of restraint forces the audience to lean in, to sense the current running beneath the still surface. The forensic quality comes from precision. Every piece of evidence, every inconsistency noted, every silence observed is part of her accumulation. What others dismiss as invisible becomes in her hands undeniable. Tone here is not mood, but weapon, a refusal to provide catharsis until control has been fully secured. The rhythm of narration relies on recurrence, with phrases that anchor and reinforce power. They do not know. I nodded once. Just watch. These refrains function as mantras, steady pulses that remind the audience of what is constant beneath shifting events. Each repetition sharpens tension, turning silence into inevitability, transforming restraint into strength, and ensuring that when the structure collapses, it feels less like chance and more like the execution of a rhythm that had been present all along. The story is threaded with the symbolism of systems and structures, where every framework, whether a bridge, an architectural span, or the invisible skeleton of digital protocols, reflects both the protagonist's mastery and her quiet rebellion. She is the one who designs and maintains these structures, ensuring they endure under weight, yet she also becomes the one who dismantles them when they are corrupted. Bridges in particular echo her role. Built to connect but vulnerable when neglected, they require precision, balance, and foresight, qualities that define her life. Architecture becomes metaphor, not for grandeur, but for integrity, where strength lies not in appearance but in foundation. By invoking structures, the narrative makes clear that she is both builder and breaker, custodian of order yet capable of controlled demolition when rot undermines stability. Equally important is the motif of plants, and specifically the cactus, chosen not for beauty but for survival. The cactus thrives where other plants perish, requiring little, enduring long stretches of neglect, storing its strength invisibly until needed. In her, the cactus finds human embodiment, low demands, invisible resilience, quiet survival in environments designed to wither those without spectacle. She does not need external validation to persist. Her endurance is internal, contained, and unyielding. Like the cactus, she holds her strength beneath the surface, unnoticed until the moment comes when survival itself becomes the act of defiance. The final motif resides in backups and storage devices, symbols of foresight and planning. Every move she makes is archived, nothing improvised, everything prepared long before its necessity becomes visible. Backups embody her philosophy. To anticipate collapse, to prepare for failure, to carry within herself the proof others believe erased. Where the corrupt rely on concealment, she relies on preservation. Her victory does not arrive through improvisation or luck, but through the careful discipline of always retaining evidence, a parallel archive that outlives betrayal. These devices, mundane to others, become her arsenal, silent, precise, unassailable. The structure of the story depends on intelligent plot engineering, where nothing arrives by chance, and every moment has been seeded long before its necessity becomes clear. Access, knowledge, and legal insight must be planted early, invisible at first, almost mundane, but later revealed. As the architecture of survival, each detail is a fuse laid in silence, waiting to burn toward revelation. The reader may not notice at the outset that the protagonist makes a quiet note of an audit irregularity, or that she stores a duplicate of a key file, or that she understands the hierarchy of compliance officers beyond their titles. Yet when the confrontation comes, each early seed flowers into inevitability, proving that her endurance was not passive but preparatory. Her strength is not improvisation but foresight, the ability to treat every moment of dismissal not as defeat but as material to be used later. No coincidence shapes her victory. She does not stumble upon evidence, nor is she rescued by allies who appear from nowhere. She wins because she saw more earlier. Her discipline is in watching, cataloging, preserving, so that by the time others realize what she has been doing, the outcome is already written. Every crack in the facade had been mapped, every shadow accounted for, every silence held until it could be weaponized. Luck is absent, inevitability reigns. The audience is reminded that competence, when underestimated, is indistinguishable from inevitability. She triumphs because she understood what they ignored, because her invisibility allowed her to see without being seen, and because endurance gave her time to prepare without interference. Exposition itself becomes weapon, not filler. Information is revealed with surgical timing, released not to explain but to dismantle. When she presents evidence, it is not to narrate but to collapse their defenses, each fact a precise strike against denial. She withholds until the moment withholding becomes revelation, then she delivers in measured doses that overwhelm not by volume but by undeniability. In her hands, exposition ceases to be narrative background and becomes assault. Data turned blade, memory turned trap, silence turned disclo. Sure, the plot functions like her, cool, calibrated, inevitable. The story demands deeper validation and psychological realism, for it is not fantasy but an architecture of earned emotion and credible corruption. The protagonist's silence is not a dramatic device but a survival mechanism honed over years of being overlooked. Her restraint is believable because it emerges from habit rather than sudden revelation. The emotional compression she embodies, anger withheld, grief unspoken, loyalty betrayed, feels lived because it is layered through endurance rather than dramatization. She did not stumble into evidence or win through luck. Instead, her path is carved by adaptation, by the refusal to let humiliation fracture her clarity. Her resilience is not mythic, it is procedural. Each withheld response, each controlled breath, becomes part of her psychological truth, building a portrait of someone who has learned that silence is safer than noise until silence itself becomes a weapon. The corruption she exposes is equally rooted in realism. There are no cartoon villains siphoning bags of cash in secret rooms. Instead, there is vendor laundering, where shell companies bleed funds under the guise of contracted services. There are inflated compliance metrics, polished reports that satisfy oversight bodies while concealing the decay beneath. There is consultancy whitewashing, where outsiders are brought in to rewrite language, bury institutional memory, and legitimize structural rot with jargon. Each fraud tactic feels credible because it reflects practices documented in reality, mechanisms of theft that thrive not through brilliance but through bureaucratic camouflage. The institution fails not because oversight is impossible, but because oversight is unwanted, because blindness is easier than confrontation. This accuracy grounds the narrative in unsettling plausibility, forcing the audience to recognize that betrayal often wears the mask of procedure. Technical fidelity reinforces the authenticity. Administrative roles are portrayed with the wear of lived experience, the forgotten hierarchy of system permissions, the quiet authority of off-site backups stored as insurance, the invisible scaffolding of enterprise access logs that few understand, but she remembers intimately. Nothing feels as though it was researched for show. It feels inhabited, as if the narrator herself spent years immersed in the machinery. By insisting on realism of emotion, accuracy of corruption, and technical fidelity, the story ensures that every fracture resonates not as invention, but as revelation, quietly undeniable. The final evaluation of the design rests in its precision, its psychological depth, its thematic weight, and its readiness for cinematic adaptation. Precision is the first standard. Every moment matters, every word functions, nothing redundant, nothing ornamental. The narrative is built as a system where omission is as significant as inclusion, where the smallest gesture, an unopened email, a paused glance at an access log, carries the same charge as an explosion in a louder story. The discipline is deliberate. The audience feels the tightening because no slack is permitted. Psychological depth follows as the core engine. Silence is not absence but design. It is a crafted presence, a refusal that generates power. The protagonist's withheld voice is never weakness. It is calibration. the mark of someone who has chosen what not to show. Every nod, every deferral, every recorded fragment exists as psychological weight, and that weight makes the eventual revelation inevitable rather than surprising. Thematically, Betrayal is not loud, it is procedural. The institution does not scream in its erasure. It writes memos, issues new ID cards, updates compliance dashboards. That quiet machinery of betrayal is what makes the story unsettling. It strips away drama and leaves only process, which is colder, crueler, and far more recognizable. Cinematically, the structure is calibrated to function like a closed system under pressure, cool, quiet, precise. Each scene builds on the logic of containment, each exchange pushing the tension closer to fracture without ever abandoning restraint. The filmic touchstones are the lives of others and Michael Clayton, yet relocated into circuitry, enterprise hierarchies, and administrative resilience. It becomes not an espionage thriller, nor a courtroom drama, but something quieter and sharper. The anatomy of betrayal mapped through the silent endurance of a woman who was never truly gone, only waiting for the right moment to return.